Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, China-US ties. President Xi Jinping met with US President Barack Obama on the sidelines of the World Nuclear Summit yesterday in a discussion that reaffirmed both commonalities and differences. And we sit down with iconic US talk show host Charlie Rose for a discussion on the rapidly evolving state of journalism. He also shared some thoughts on how media has played a role in the rise of presidential candidate Donald Trump. Friends or rivals? What exactly should be the characterization of US-China relations? The two have found common ground on various regional and international affairs like climate change and the DPRK nuclear threat, and yet frictions remain on issues including maritime disputes and cybersecurity. On Thursday, Chinese President Xi Jinping met with his U.S. counterpart Barack Obama on the sidelines of the Fourth Nuclear Security Summit in a discussion that touched on both positive and apparently negative aspects of the U.S.-China relations.
Cooperation and friction. Chinese President Xi Jinping on Thursday met with his U.S. counterpart Barack Obama. The two leaders pledged to strengthen cooperation.
As
the largest developing country and the largest developed country, and also as the world's top two economies, China and the United States have growing responsibilities for promoting world peace, stability, and prosperity. There are wide areas where we should and can work with each other.
U.S. President Barack Obama echoed his remarks.
The United States welcomes the rise of a peaceful, stable, and prosperous China, working with us to address global challenges, and I have been committed throughout my administration to working effectively with China on a whole range of issues, and have developed a frank and effective level of communications cooperation with President Xi as we seek to expand cooperation between our countries.
In 2015, China-US bilateral trade, two-way investment, and personal exchanges all hit a record high. The two countries have maintained effective cooperation in addressing major regional and international issues, including climate change and the Iranian nuclear negotiations. And now the focus has turned to the nuclear threat posed by the DPRK.
Of great importance to both of us is North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons, which threatens the security and stability of the region. And President Xi and I are both committed to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and full implementation of UN sanctions.
But still, differences remain, and the two leaders have not shied away from that fact.
In the meantime, as you have said, Mr. President, our two countries have some disputes and disagreements in some areas. On the basis of respecting each other's core interests and major concerns, we should seek active solutions through dialogue and consultation.
Among the countries' differences are maritime disputes. President Xi urged the U.S. to keep its promise of not picking a side on issues surrounding the South China Sea and to play a constructive role in maintaining stability in the region. The year 2016 will be challenging for Sino-US ties, as the U.S. is expecting a new president and differences remain. But as cooperation and dialogue between the two sides has deepened throughout the years, a better future for Sino-US ties is within reach.
For more on the China-US relations, we're joined here in the Beijing studio, Mr. Yuan Peng, who is the Vice President of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Welcome to our program, Mr. Yuan from Beijing. Meanwhile, joining us from Washington, D.C. inside the United States, we have Mr. Charles Freeman, who is the International Principal at Forbes Tate. Welcome as well, Mr. Freeman. Knowing that your family has had a long history of dealing with China and also analyzing China, let me begin the conversation with you, Mr. Freeman. First of all, what do you make of the agreement by the two sides this time about the nuclear security, U.S. and China?
I think it's very important. I mean, one of the, as both leaders talked about, there are disputes between the two, and there are not always friendly relations between the two on certain issues. But where we can find an ability to cooperate, we should make the most of that. And I think, developing those habits of cooperation is key to developing the kind of mutual trust that I think everybody on both sides of the relationship thinks we need. So I think it's very positive that we have this kind of agreement, and one hopes that this is the first of many to come.
All right. First of all, Nuclear Security Center that has been established here in Beijing between China and the United States, state-of-the-art, really, a facility. And then we have this wonderful agreement between the two top leaders of the countries. Is that really, how much a positive step, shall I ask this way, Mr. Yuan, do you consider in terms of the bilateral relations with the recent fruits on nuclear security?
U.S. and China are two both major nuclear powers, and facing today's nuclear threat and the potential challenge of nuclear proliferation, and facing Iranian and DPRK nuclear crisis, as the two major nuclear powers, and the U.S. and China show their common interests and joint responsibilities to sign this joint statement, which show that we can cooperate in the global arena, like climate change cooperation. So on the one hand, we have some competition in Asian Pacific, South China Sea and other issues, but on the other hand, in the global arena, we have lots of in common to pursue in the common interests.
Before we go to the regional issues, like you mentioned about South China Sea and many others, let's focus still on the global issues. Going a little bit one step deeper, Mr. Freeman, what do you think can be the inspirations drawn from U.S. and China's participation of the P5+1 Iranian nuclear deal discussion, and later two countries together with others jointly at the UN Security Council issued the 2270 Security Council resolution against the DPRK toward the latter's nuclear test. What kinds of inspiration can we really draw? Have those inspirations been really cherished and well studied by the two sides?
I think it's a process and not an event. But I think what's really interesting, and I think very heartening to the U.S. and observers here, is China's increasing recognition that it has global responsibilities and is taking a very positive and proactive and productive way of fulfilling those responsibilities. That's something that the United States has been encouraging China to do for some time, and it's very encouraging that China is making the most of its responsibilities in these global organizations.
Mr. Yuan, when you look at the surface, China and the U.S. did cooperate to a great deal on these two issues, Iran nuclear issue and also the DPRK sanctions. But when you look at the details, some might be able to find out some differences already. Devils are in the details, as they say. On the DPRK issue, of course, China advocate about the complete implementation of the Security Council resolution. On the one hand, it's a sanction. On the other hand, it is seeking to negotiate and also dialogue. Of course, the U.S. President today also talked about the complete implementation, but many consider it a bit different in degree. Also, on the Iranian nuclear issue, yes, indeed, there's already the world applauded for this deal, but China has always been advocating not to interfere in others' internal affairs, while the West seem to, including the United States, have a different view on certain issues at certain moments. So, Mr. Yuan, will these two things really provide us with real inspirations about how the two countries can deal with other issues? After all, devils are in the details. It's a long question, but I think it's an important question.
Yeah, on the one hand, we have a very common interest in some broad concept and idea, including denuclearization of DPRK and the prevention of the proliferation. But on the other hand, in some details, we still find some disputes and differences. For example, in DPRK sanctions, we don't have any big disputes on the sanction per se, but first of all, in which way we issue the sanction, and secondly, in what extent. And we think the sanction is just for the make DPRK get to be polished, and maybe the United States think the sanction maybe make the DPRK going to collapse and make the Qing dynasty going collapse. In this regard, we have differences. The secondly, I think Americans think the sanctions is the only way to prevention of DPRK from going further. But we think that sanctions just one method. On the other hand, we think the final resolution should be negotiation and consultation. So finally, I think Americans pushing for China to the completely implementation. They think that maybe China cannot fully, implement all these sanctions. So if we check all those details, we find still some very sensitive and subtle differences. But how to manage all those differences to achieve a joint endeavor to make the sanctions get to work is our future areas to cooperate.
Devils are in the details, and some of those subtleties, quote unquote, mentioned by Mr. Yuan here in Beijing, will play a big role about the potential as to how much the two countries can still further cooperate on these important issues, Iranian nuclear deal and also the DPRK nuclear issue. Mr. Freeman, what do you make of these devils, quote unquote, and those subtleties? Sometimes they're really dealing with the fundamental beliefs the two countries have about international affairs.
Yeah, I think I agree with my good friend Dr. Yuan that there are some broad concepts in terms of nuclear proliferation that both sides can share very comfortable common ground on. But if you look at the DPRK issue, I think the United States looks at the peninsula and thinks that the current regime in Pyongyang is itself a destabilizing factor in Northeast Asia. I think China would question that and may actually add that the alternative to Mr. Kim and his regime may be more destabilizing. So we do have some very fundamental disagreements about the direction of where we want to see North Korea go, both in terms of its politics and in terms of its approach to nuclear proliferation. So there are some fundamental challenges between the two sides and even conceptual issues.
On these conceptual issues, will they, as a result then, be the hindrance for the two countries to cooperate further, not only on the nuclear proliferation issues, but also even on the nuclear security issues, as we mentioned, a wonderful agreement being signed already by the two sides. But when it comes to implementation, there are different kinds of ideologies, different kinds of belief systems, different kinds of international relations tactics, and also strategies that we are talking about. Very different one another. Mr. Freeman, I want you to weigh in on this as well.
Well, as I said at the beginning, I think the really important thing for the United States and China is to build habits of cooperation, to approach things consultatively, cooperatively. The devil is in the details, as you say, and that's absolutely right, but you have to start from a proposition that the two sides can come to some agreement on areas of common concern. So while you may look at the joint statement and the holes in that statement for misapplication of principles are pretty large, but at the same time it does show common ground and shows an ability to work together on an issue that's critical to both capitals.
Chinese President Xi Jinping this time on Thursday during his talk with U.S. President Barack Obama even also mentioned about this, how to seek a solution to some of the different opinions the two countries have. He talked about it is important to respect each other and also to seek solutions even with all of these differences. Mr. Yuan, what about that? seeking a solution. It is no secret that you and your colleagues, together with the American counterparts, have been working on that for decades, if not more. We see some interesting phenomena. Global issues, like both of you and Mr. Freeman mentioned, climate change, nuclear issue, global ones. It seems that both countries have some kinds of common destiny, even though the solutions could be different. However, when it comes to regional issues, which you mentioned, South China Sea issue, for example, enormous amount of differences in opinions and judgment about the intentions of one another. Mr. Yuan.
Yeah, it's a very strange feature that globally speaking, we can cooperate very well. But regionally speaking, we always, or many times, we compete against each other. The reason is very easy, that China is Asian Pacific power. And America also boasted itself Asian Pacific power. So how those big global power and at the same time the Asian Pacific power living together peacefully is a new test for the two countries. Now in the current time, we face some South China Sea disputes, East China Sea disputes, and this is the very hottest topic. Besides this, we have some bilateral disputes, like cyber security disputes, which actually has already been settled after Xi's visit last year. But recently, I have noticed that President Obama mentioned it again this time, show that still it's American concerns. So that's why President Xi mentioned that both sides should respect the other country's core interest and major concerns. We cannot just cooperate in dealing DPRK nuclear crisis, but on the other hand, we struggle on South China Sea. So China want to have some linkage thinking. We think it's a package of cooperation. We cannot compete in this regard and cooperate well in that regard. So how to make the Asian Pacific peaceably living together in whole package of thinking is a new test for the future relations.
Mr. Freeman, should we have a whole package, as Mr. Yuan mentioned, or should we have split personality, quote unquote?
I think it will be hard to get a comprehensive agreement on all issues, and so I think the best we can hope to do at this point is to address each issue in turn. But I think Dr. Yuan is absolutely correct. I mean, the ideal and the direction that we want to go in is to have a comprehensive trust. So when even issues that are as thorny as South China Sea come up, that we have some basic framework of trust that two sides can come together and recognize that there is a win-win solution. We're a little far apart at this point on South China Sea and others, but in areas like cyber, which was probably the top issue in U.S.-China relations, at least from the U.S. perspective, last September, President Xi's visit was very helpful in setting that issue on a positive and productive course. So we are seeing solutions come up even in areas of dispute, or we're going towards solutions. But I think that we're a pretty long way away from a comprehensive agreement on all the issues that concern us.
Nobody should complain that the two top leaders from China and U.S. haven't tried, because really, according to the record, they have met many times since they come into the office, and also tried their way to put over their opinions to the other party, try to build confidence. But the thing is, what about the fundamental interests of these two countries? After all, it is a rising power and incumbent power, as we have always talked about. Mr. Freeman, will top leadership exchange like this, at this level, international, bilateral, multilateral framework, would they ever work for two countries which are in this nature of relation?
Well, presidential symmetry has become very important to the relationship and to keeping it going. We have enormous exchanges at all levels between government, between the private sector, cultural exchanges between the two sides that drive the relationship hopefully forward, but sometimes drive it backward. And so I do think you need the kind of meetings between presidents, between leadership that that keeps the entire relationship on a positive course. You know, one of the challenges, of course, is that President Obama is in his final year, so it may be tempting from the Chinese side to ignore the Obama administration a little bit and prepare for whatever administration comes in. You know, there's certainly no sense in the United States that President Xi is a lame duck, as President Obama is, but you know, there are still questions about how the Chinese government is set up, and so I do think it's important for the presidents to get together and at least talk about these big issues.
We've already played on our screen some of those earlier encounters between those two presidents, but Mr. Freeman suggests China prepare for the next administration. Of course, at this point, it's still a big question mark, a lot of drama going on over there. Mr. Yuan, you're a seasoned Chinese expert about the U.S. politics. How prepared can China be? And also, how to handle this transition year from one administration to another, particularly given the what some describe as chaotic political situation over there at the primaries these days?
Actually, China has get used to this kind of transitional season of the American domestic politics in the past 40 years. So we are quite calm in viewing the American change of the regime or change of the presidency. But this time a little bit different because of this time in American domestic politics really have a sea change because of Donald Trump and because of Hillary Clinton and because of the very strange primary in both parties. So this time my guess is quite different from the original 7 to 8 times. So how to manage, how to prevent the coming American change of the regime or change of the presidency to influence U.S. and China relations is something that we and both countries should prepare very seriously.
Right. Any advice, Mr. Freeman?
Well, I'd say that in every election, China has always come up in the United States in the primary season with people talking about the negative aspects of trade with China, about human rights concerns, about security concerns with respect to China. They always come up, and whoever's elected, that president always tends to walk away from a lot of that rhetoric to pursue a more constructive relationship with China. I certainly anticipate that will be the case, regardless of who comes in January next year.
We hope traditional wisdom will still work for this time, but before we go, final words from you, Mr. Yuan. What do you think? How long do you think can we expect the learning curve of the next administration? And also during this process, how can China, at least from Chinese perspective, try to manage the situation with the United States?
It really depends on who will be the next American president. If Hillary Clinton be the next president, I mean, the learning curve should be much shorter because she once served as Secretary of State. She knows China. And if another guy, no matter as Donald Trump or some other GOP candidate, I think my guess is quite longer, maybe even more than 1 and 1.5 years. That worries China, that China should be very preparing for this specific case.
Well, that's when the time that both of you and many other China experts and the U.S. experts have to work very hard, I guess. For now, thank you so much, Yuan Peng here in Beijing and Charles Freeman in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us, both of you. Appreciate it, gentlemen. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. We sit down with the media icon Charlie Rose for a discussion on the changing role of journalism. He also shares some thoughts on how media has played a role in presidential candidate Donald Trump's success so far. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. It's fair to say that we are now in a fully digital age with faster internet accessible to more people around the world. Life has become much more dependent on digital networks. For the media, that shift has revolutionized the industry. Print media and television have struggled to keep their footing as digital media platforms have increased their market share. Earlier, I sat down with Charlie Rose, a renowned American television talk show host and journalist, who shared his views on the future of journalism. Before we go to the interview, let's take a look at this.
Just a few decades ago, we absorbed almost all of our information from printed media, including newspapers, magazines, and books. But technology has reshaped reality. Now, a world of information is at our fingertips on the internet. In many ways, that change has made our lives easier. But for traditional media, it's been a difficult transition. In March, UK newspaper The Independent closed its print operations and went digital only. In 2013, Amazon head Jeff Bezos bought US newspaper The Washington Post, which is now increasingly investing in new media tools that promote video and digital storytelling. Audience totals for TV shows have also slipped as more people, especially younger viewers, turn to online sources. Amidst these major shifts, traditional media has been forced to adapt in order to survive.
Take Diplo for an example. Diplo is a very, very famous electronic dance musician. He was not known to me, but a very young and smart member of my staff said we should have him on. I had him on. We got a great response. He then invited me to go to Cuba with him. So 2 weekends ago, I was in Cuba with Diplo, a musician who I didn't even know other than 6 weeks ago, and he had 400,000 people in Cuba for a Diplo concert.
Isn't that amazing?
So that shows you that if you have young people, they'll give you a great access to a range of people you might not have known. I mean, and I find though that they're as interested in what's happening. They're interested in politics, they're interested in international affairs, they're interested in culture. It depends on how you present it, your authenticity, your enthusiasm, you know, how much you care about the content you present.
Did you fall in love with his music eventually?
I liked it a lot because it has a certain movement to it, and I liked it a lot. I also am very much friends of people like Wynton Marsalis, the great jazz artist, and a whole range of people. Ed Sheeran, another young musician, came to my show.
Do you think, though, it is kind of outdated that we have these kinds of exclusive interview program format for today's younger generation?
Well, I think the younger generation has a different, they grew up with different kinds of media, so their expectations are different. But at the same time, I find that young people are as interested in appearing on my program, and they know their audience. I mean, Diplo, or Ed Sheeran, or Leonardo DiCaprio, who's an actor. All of them want to reach a young audience, but they all come to my program and want to do, you know, a long-form interview.
What's going to happen to journalism, Charlie? Shed some light for us, because I'm sure you witness even more some of your best friends leaving the trade.
I do see that, and I worry about that because they're skilled people, and they have all the tools and the experience of journalism. On the other hand, I see people who are understanding. Jeff Bezos has bought the Washington Post. He has made the Washington Post a better paper. He's made it a global paper, and he's trying to convert it into a digital world.
But what about the balance between these two? You see so many more talents leaving the trade, while there are not many Jeff Bezos that are now supporting. Yes, exactly. It's supporting the traditional
media.
media.
Being hired by Bloomberg too.
Yes, true.
It's clearly Bloomberg has been hiring more journalists around the world than anybody that I know.
Yeah.
There may be others, but I'm not aware of anyone who's been hiring more. The interesting thing is that clearly we have to come to grips with the digital revolution, and it is changing journalism.
Does it make us more clear-minded from a journalistic perspective?
What it does from a journalistic perspective, it is that it doesn't change the work dynamic. And a great journalist has to be able to write well, has to be able to analyze well, has to be able to create sentences and analysis that makes a difference. That is still a primary requirement. We now have more tools to do that, and we have more ways to distribute the analysis, the interviews, what you were doing. I mean, you're seen around the world because of CCTV.
But less opportunity to have this paramount power to challenge a specific issue. For example, the Watergate issue in your politics and history. But now it's very hard to find one or two media organizations, or even a number of them, strong enough to be able to push this agenda, not worry about the financial problems and challenges on issues like this.
All of them are facing that problem, including the New York Times.
Yes, indeed.
And including the Washington Post. That's why the Washington Post was sold to Jeff Bezos, because of the financial dilemma it faced. Clearly, especially for newspapers. And that demands that they be more creative as they try and as they look to the future and try to figure out, as they sometimes have said, how do you convert digital dimes into analog dollars?
Journalism is being regarded as respectful because of editorial independence, because of the division between marketing and editorial decisions. So
I can only speak from my experience.
Yes, but so what would all of this mean?
No one has ever tried to interfere with my editorial independence. No one. No publisher, no owner, no one. And I suspect that's true for most of my colleagues.
Do you have times that you have to overcome your professional fatigue to get you once again interested in what you are doing continuously?
No. First of all, I'm unique in the sense that I have 3 or 4 great jobs at 60 Minutes, at CBS This Morning, at Charlie Rose, at CBS. I do another occasion. I'm doing a thing now for CBS Sunday Morning.
Amazing.
So I have access to a number of programs, and several of them, 2 of them are daily programs. 60 Minutes is a weekly program, which I do occasionally. But I find that I'm maybe working harder than I ever have, having more fun than I ever have, and because of the fact that I can come to China and spend 3 days here and learn as much as I can and have as much access as I have, not to the top leadership, but my access to President Obama is limited as well. But to talk to people like you and like people who shape public opinion in China, and to talk to business people, civil servants, is a remarkable thing to do, and that makes my job as exciting as it's ever been. And we can distribute it immediately. And as you know, because of the technology, it's smaller, it's faster, it's better.
Looking into the future, what do you make of the role of media? Once again, people have been talking about media traditionally as the so-called the fourth power of the country. There are different beliefs.
And
but what's
media's
the
changed.
future?
How many people do you know that spend a lot of time tweeting? I don't know how much you do it
Enormous
here.
amount of time.
I have people that are on a set with me, as guests, and they're half of the time, whenever there's a break, they're on their smartphone, either tweeting or looking at their email or looking at their tweets. Clearly that's become a fact of our life. I don't do that as much as some of my colleagues do, because for me, the fundamentals are still the same. And I think for most of us, it is preparation, listening, reaching out and making sure that you're exposed to as many ideas as you possibly can, meeting as many interesting people as you can, and also being able to cover a wide spectrum of material, from culture to science to technology. I was just talking to the CEO of IBM, because I'm doing a program for 60 Minutes about artificial intelligence. On the other hand, tomorrow I'll be talking about American politics here in China. When I get back, we'll be talking about sports, culture.
Splendid,
mood.
isn't it?
Get up every morning.
Yes.
How lucky am I? And you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And it's a global audience too.
It is.
I have a global audience. You have a global audience. That's what makes it exciting, because when I come to Beijing, there are people who come up to me and talk about programs that they have seen that I've done. They may have seen them traveling, or they may have seen them here, but it is a connection on a global scope.
As the old saying goes, all press is good press. Whether negative or positive, media coverage grows a person's fame and importance. That can be particularly true in politics. U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump is a perfect example. The Republican frontrunner has dominated the media since he entered the presidential race, netting far more coverage than his rivals. He has determined the focus of the national debates and has arguably redefined the parameters of acceptable discourse.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion, yes or no, as a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah.
Even U.S. President Barack Obama faulted the media for contributing to Trump's rise. Trump has also exhibited a brilliant grasp of social media, and particularly Twitter, where he commands over 7 million followers.
I'm sure in your daily conversation do a lot with the primaries and the campaigns. What do you make of the Donald Trump phenomenon?
It's real. He may very well and is likely to get the Republican nomination. At this point, Secretary Clinton is likely to get the Democratic nomination, and she is, in today's polling, ahead of him by most polls by maybe 10%. But all that could change. Donald Trump has surprised everyone. No one would have believed that he would be where he is today. I mean, he's an outsider. He has no political experience. But he thought seriously about this. And we don't really know where his convictions are. We know the positions he's taken, and those positions have appealed to a certain segment of the Republican Party.
Did you interview Donald Trump after he started the campaign?
I did. Yeah.
What is the takeaway from the interview you had?
Well, the takeaway is that he thought about this carefully. He knew the audience that he was going for. His initial speech was about immigration. He's talked, obviously, as you know, about politics and economics. He's driven by media. He knows media. He follows media. You know, he tweets all the time. He's a guy that understands media. He understands the idea from his television program of how to speak through media. That has enabled him to get a lot of free airtime, and also to do it and not have to raise a lot of money, which he has some, in order to do what we call paid media.
Right. But there has been concerns whether the U.S. presidential campaign, especially primary time these days, it's all about showtime and nothing about the policy time.
There has not been. There have been in these debates, you know, some serious consideration of issues. I think.
But that, of course, all overshadowed by the rhetoric coming from
and by Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been the story of American politics in 2016. I mean, Hillary Clinton has done is likely to win the Democratic nomination, but no one that I know would have predicted that Senator Sanders would do as well as he has done. And he has raised a ton of money. And he can go as long as he wants to go, even though she's piling up the delegates.
What does it mean for the U.S. politics eventually? And what does it mean for the capability of governing of the man or woman who's likely to be sitting in the White House?
Well, I mean, these are some of the questions that the people in the Republican Party are asking right now, because you know, there's an effort by the Republican establishment to stop Donald Trump. It's unlikely to happen, and perhaps if they had started earlier, it might have had a better chance of success. And what it means for the Republican Party is that many of those people worry what it means for the party first, if in fact Trump is the nominee.
But some suggest it has been a continuing story of what the Republican Party did it themselves because of
Indeed, they do. And there is, in terms of gridlock in Washington, and the Republicans controlling now the Senate and the House, but having controlled the House, and John Boehner, when he was a House Speaker, and the conflicts he had with President Obama, led to a kind of gridlock in Washington. And a lot of people in the Republican Party, and certainly in the right of the Republican Party, Tea Party people and others, have been so turned off by politics, Republican and Democrat, that Donald Trump comes along as an outsider, and he has some appeal to that element, and he gained traction with them early, talking about immigration, talking about keeping Muslims out temporarily.
Is this a dangerous trend, from your perspective?
Yes, it is. I mean, the idea of some of the, I mean, I think America is a country that has benefited from immigration tremendously. I think not only in terms of the Southern Hemisphere, Latinos, but also from around the world.
A chat with Charlie Rose. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Inside CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching and tune in again next week for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.